Anson Mills was so humiliated when he failed out of his second year at West Point, he couldn't go home to his father. So he went to Texas. But when the Civil War broke out just a few years later, Mills's old West Point classmates petitioned for him to be commissioned as an officer in the Union Army. After serving throughout the war's Western Theater, Captain Mills stayed in the Army, and by mid-June 1876 was one of the most experienced captains in the 3rd U.S. Cavalry Regiment, marching with General George Crook along Rosebud Creek in southern Montana. The Battle of the Rosebud is often thought of as an introduction to the Great Sioux War's main event, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which is a shame. The warriors who fought there on both sides certainly didn't see it that way. In reality, the Battle of the Rosebud was a 6-hour-long chess match played between expert warriors near the top of their game. By the spring of 1876, the bands of Lakota and Northern Cheyenne that had left their reservations on the Northern Plains had been deemed hostile. This meant the responsibility of handling them transferred to the U.S. Army, and the commander, Philip Sheridan, devised a plan to do so. The first expedition against the hostiles came in March, when Brigadier General George Crook led a force through the Powder River country and attacked a Cheyenne village. This debacle definitely deserves its own video. For now, just know that it went so badly for the Army that it ended with General Crook court-martialing some of his own officers. George Crook had graduated near the bottom of his class at West Point. As a young officer, Crook had been assigned along the California-Oregon border, where he cut his teeth fighting against the Pitt River Indians. During one battle, a native arrow buried itself 2 inches into his right hip. The arrowhead itself was never removed. During the Civil War, Crook served in the Western Theater, then found himself back out west after the war. By 1875, he was widely regarded as one of his country's most experienced Indian fighters, and was selected to command the Department of the Platte. When his old West Point classmate Philip Sheridan developed the plan to fight the hostiles, Crook mobilized almost every unit under his command. Crook was introverted and unassuming. While on campaign, he rarely wore anything other than a civilian coat and hat, with his beard separated into 2 braids. The guy just wasn't a talker. For example, check out how he described his wedding in his autobiography. "I was married on August 22nd, 1865. One of the officers serving under him wrote, "Probably no officer of equal rank in our army issued fewer orders or letters of instruction. Example," he said, "is always the best general order." That's a nice way of putting it. Another officer was not so nice. It was said that General Crook was a cold, gray-eyed, and somewhat cold-blooded warrior, treating his men perhaps too practically in wartime. By the end of May, Crook was moving north with 15 troops from the 2nd and 3rd U.S. Cavalry, and 5 infantry companies from the 4th and 9th Regiments, over 1,000 soldiers, plus over 100 wagons and almost 1,000 mules to haul supplies. Crook's column, officially named the Bighorn and Yellowstone Expedition, is the largest of Sheridan's 3 columns moving to fight the hostiles. What Crook didn't have, and really wanted, was an alliance. Crook knew that the best way to fight Indians was with other Indians. After all, they are the experts. Why wouldn't you leverage the people who have lived in this area for generations and legit have beef with the people you're getting ready to fight? So he sends his 3 best guides, Frank Grouard, Louis Richard, and Baptiste Big Bat Poirier, to find the Lakota and Cheyenne's enemies and convince them to join his outfit. These men leave Crook's column and ride for miles, appealing to the Crow and Shoshone tribes in the area to fight the hated Lakota and Cheyenne. After days of riding, the scouts return with their new allies. But there's another problem. When the Crow and Shoshone attempt to link up with Crook around midnight, one of the scouts guarding the camp answers them in the Lakota dialect. Spooky for the Crow. They think the whole thing is a trap and leave, and now Grouard has to reconvince them all over again. Finally, on June 14th, Crook makes contact with 175 Crow and 86 Shoshone warriors near modern-day Sheridan, Wyoming. The Shoshone are led by the legendary Chief Washakie, who at this point in life is well into his 70s. He's still as much a ruthless warrior as he's ever been, though, and he's even been training his warriors in Army cavalry drill. After a brief welcome ceremony, the Shoshone warriors move out by files, which impresses the officers. While Crook's guides were out recruiting his allies, his column's march north was tedious and grueling. The soldiers get hit with an early June snowstorm, and without their best guides, end up marching up the wrong stream and getting briefly lost. There's also an issue with one of the teamsters driving the wagons. He turns out to be a she. Martha Jane Cannery, one of the prostitutes who had worked near Captain Mills's post on the North Platte. While she was being arrested, and as Mills passed by, she yells, "There's Colonel Mills, he knows me." Mills, who's married, quickly plays it off like, "Hey, I don't know her like that. All I know is she cooks for one of the other officers. That's how she probably knows my name. Plus, I'm a captain, everybody knows me." Mills later remembered, "For several days, my particular friends pulled me aside and asked me, 'Who is Calamity Jane?' I, of course, denied any knowledge of her or her calling, but nobody believed me then, and I doubt very much whether they all do yet. Calamity Jane is sent back from the column and just a few weeks later ends up in Deadwood, South Dakota.
F you and f the rooms you rent. I'm calling on the widow and the little one in her care. And if I was you, or any sucker with you, I wouldn't try to stop me.
Be brief.
Be f***ed!
What a peach. Crook wants his soldiers to get a different type of action, and on June 9th they finally get a taste. Little Hawk, an Oglala warrior and one of Crazy Horse's relatives, finds the expedition's camp. A group of Lakota fire into Crook's camp, and Crook sends his cavalry after the warriors without success. It's a minor skirmish, but it's important. You have to remember, many of the veterans on this campaign have marched for weeks to months in other campaigns trying to locate hostile Indians and never finding them. The fact that the hostiles are willing to come and play this time? This isn't going to be some wild goose chase. These soldiers are going to have some fun. After Crook's link-up with the Crow and Shoshone on June 14th, he develops his battle plan. The hostiles' main village is going to be on a water source to Crook's north, probably more than 50 miles away. Crook knows that if you control the village's non-combatants, the women, children, and such, you can take the fight out of the warriors. Crook envisions a lightning strike and orders his command to strip down for combat. Every soldier will bring his weapon with 100 rounds of ammo, a blanket, enough food for 4 days, and nothing else. The wagon train, even the soldiers' tents, are going to be left behind. That gives Crook about 96 hours to find and subdue the village. Here's the problem, though. A quarter of Crook's soldiers are infantry, and there's just no way they'd be able to keep up with the mounted troops. So Crook orders the officer in charge of the infantry, Major Alex Chambers, to mount his soldiers on the pack mules. Everybody that witnessed what happened next universally agrees. It was hilarious. The cavalry officers, the troopers, even the Crow and Shoshone give the foot soldiers a crash course on how to ride, and watching the soldiers mount and try to ride the mules is just fantastic. One of Crook's lieutenants remembered, amusing incidents there were in plenty, and many scenes of grand and lofty tumbling occurred. Frank Garrard said, "I never saw so much fun in all my life." Later on, when the mule brigade finally get their mounts in line next to the cavalry horses, the mules start braying loudly. Major Chambers is so embarrassed he throws his sword down and stomps off. You can't make this stuff up. At 1 a.m. the next morning, June 16th, the expedition marches out. Crook's command is organized into 5 battalions. Captain Henry Noyes commands the 2nd Cav companies, A, B, D, E, and I. The 3rd Cav is divided into 3 battalions. Captain Mills commands companies A, E, I, and M. Captain Guy Henry is in charge of B, D, F, and L. And Captain Frederick Van Vliet commands companies C and G. Major Chambers commands the 5 infantry companies, companies D and F from the 4th Infantry, and the 9th Infantry's C, G, and H. Overall control of the cavalry is given to Lieutenant Colonel William Royal. Around 250 Crow and Shoshone warriors, and a few dozen packers and miners the expedition picked up along the way, round out Crook's numbers. He's got about 1,300 shooters, double what George Custer has in his 7th Cavalry. The sole wheeled vehicle is a 2-wheeled cart used by Crook's engineering officer. This cart is equipped with all sorts of scientific measuring devices, but within a few miles it breaks down and is left behind. That day the command covers more than 35 miles, going up the Tongue River and crossing over to the headwaters of Rosebud Creek. The command passes through a buffalo herd, and Crook's native allies can't help but break ranks and shoot the animals. Crook's officers are upset at the breach of discipline. The rifle shots are going to be heard for miles around. His scouts also advise him these buffalo look like they've been driven for some distance. Someone else has been hunting this herd. As night falls, the exhausted troopers get a few hours' sleep, but by sunup they're on the move again. For hours they follow the green ribbon of grass that grows along the creek until they reach what Crook's scouts call the Rosebud's Big Bend, where the creek flows eastward before taking a sudden turn to the north. By this point, Crook's men need some rest before the day gets hot again. This also gives him an opportunity to throw his scouts out and get more intel on where exactly the Indian village is. At about 8 a.m., the scouts depart. Captain Henry's battalion has led the movement on the creek's left bank, while Captain Mills leads on the right. Behind Henry is Van Vliet's 2-troop battalion, followed by the infantry and civilian packers. The men grab catnaps while their mounts graze. Crook even gets a little card game going with some of his staff. After about half an hour, the soldiers begin hearing gunshots to the north, behind a high ridge line. Some of them figure the scouts must have found some more buffalo, but Captain Mills' servant draws his attention to the ridge line. At a speech given years later, he said, Looking north, I saw on the crest of the horizon, about 2 miles distant, great numbers of moving objects, looking somewhat like distant crows, silhouetted on the clear sky above the horizon. I soon came to the conclusion that they were Indians in great numbers. The Lakota and Cheyenne haven't been sitting on their hands this whole time. They've been keeping an eye on the Bluecoats, and now they want to attack the column before it gets too close to their village. Overnight, hundreds of warriors, probably around 1,500 to 2,000, have ridden towards Crook. And it would have been a near perfect ambush from the high ground around Crook if it weren't for the Crow and Shoshone. While some warriors ride back and alert Crook, others turn toward their traditional enemies. For the next 20 minutes, for one of the last times on the Great Plains, the Crow and Shoshone fight the Lakota and Cheyenne the old way. Captain Mills quickly gets his battalion ready and crosses the Rosebud, where he meets Crook and receives his orders. Get to higher ground, take the bluffs, and hold them. Mills charges his battalion to the first ridge, where he dismounts and has his troopers take cover behind some boulders. At this point, he estimates he's facing at least 1,000 men, and his troopers have difficulty picking targets. As he put it, in charging up towards us, they exposed little of their person, hanging on with one arm around the neck and one leg over the horse, firing and lancing from underneath the horses' necks, so that there was no part of the Indian at which we could aim. The warriors move off to Mills's left, which allows him to charge another ridge. While riding up, Mills's bugler, Elmer Snow, takes a bullet that shatters both his forearms, leaving his wrists dangling. Bugler Snow's horse freaks out and gallops straight towards the hostiles. As he passes Frank Gerard, Frank sees what's about to happen and gallops his horse next to Snow. I hit the horse over the head as hard as I could in an effort to turn it, but the horse was stubborn and frightened and was not easily turned. I told the wounded man to throw himself off when I hit the horse the second time. He gave me one look that I will never forget. Frank hits the horse and Bugler Snow jumps off. His horse runs among the hostiles and disappears, but Bugler Snow makes it back to friendly lines. While Mills continues charging uphill, he's supplemented by Noyes' troopers from the 2nd Cavalry. While Company A holds the battalion's horses, Companies D, E, B, and I rush toward the top of a high ridge. Crook also orders Van Vliet's 2 troops to the south, where they drive off and attempt to flank Crook's camp from that direction. Mills's troopers seize an area that's been used as a buffalo jump for who knows how many years, and it's in this area that an event occurred which gives this battle its name among the Northern Cheyenne.
So right behind you, right in front of me, is the area along Rosebud Creek where General Crook's soldiers stopped the morning of June 17th. This draw I'm in is actually one of the few available fields of fire that the soldiers had at the beginning stages of the battle. One of the native warriors named Comes in Sight had his horse shot out from underneath him and was in the middle of a kill zone, except his sister came in and saved him. A Buffalo Calf road woman actually rode in on a horse under fire and picked him up and got him to safety. And that event is what gave this battle its name, the battle where the sister saved her brother.
As Captain Mills's battalion secures this area, he realizes he's missing one of his companies. Company I had been directed by Colonel Royal to assist Captain Henry's battalion on the left side of Crook's battle line. Mills charges up the next ridge anyways, and Chambers' infantry moves north to secure what will come to be known as Crook's Hill, where the general will direct the battle.
I'm standing right underneath Crook's Hill, and he really had a commanding view of the battle as events unfolded. This is really the spot you want to be. You can see the valleys and the draws to your northeast, and then you have a broad view of your soldiers and their dispositions.
Colonel Royal takes direct command of Company I, along with Captain Henry's 4 companies, and moves to the left of Crook's line, past a wide gully. Guy Henry was tough. Seriously, they don't make him like that anymore tough. A couple of years prior, he had gotten caught in a bitter snowstorm with his men and ended up losing a finger to frostbite. Even years afterward, his left hand didn't really work right, but the captain just kept jobbing it. Now, after the initial warning, Captain Henry had taken troops D and F about a quarter mile away onto high ground to the west. As Colonel Royal orders Henry further up the ridge, he keeps maneuvering his troops to prevent the warriors from coming around the left of the line and flanking them. 18 troopers from 2nd Platoon, Company I, charge 3 hostile positions, while Captain William Andrews brings the rest of Company I up to a high point where he receives what he describes as a terribly strong fire from a rocky point on my right. From his position, Colonel Royal sees that Company I is overextended, so he recalls them to his location about a mile west from General Crook. But Royal himself is overextended from the rest of the command. General Crook is doing his own assessment. The action on his right and center have pushed the Lakota and Cheyenne west, towards Royal's isolated force. The hostiles have done a great job evading the Army's combat power. Every time his soldiers charge, the hostiles retreat to the next ridge. Crook's allied Crow and Shoshone continue to take the fight to the enemy, but this comes as a mixed blessing. They're so close to the fight, and the soldiers can't tell the difference between the friendly warriors and the not-so-friendly. General Crook had asked his native allies to wear red headbands, but that didn't do anything. Everyone wore red headbands, friend and foe. In his official report, Crook details the reasoning behind his next move. Under the circumstances, I did not believe that any fight we could have would be decisive in its result, unless we secured their village, supposed to be in close proximity. I therefore made every effort to close the command and march on their village. General Crook orders Captain Mills to take his battalion and ride down the Rosebud. That's the closest water source, and Crook figures the Indians are only fighting this hard because their village is nearby. Captain Noyes' battalion follows Mills, and the general assures the captain that he will support his movement with the rest of the command. To support this offensive movement, Crook needs to reunite the rest of his men. Van Vliet's battalion comes up safely enough, but Royal's men on the far left are being hard pressed by the hostiles. They've occupied the high ground in the area, and the minute they give that ground up, the Lakota and Cheyenne will retake it. Then they'll pour fire on the troopers as they try to cross over the open terrain. Royal withdraws southeast along a ridge, but at some point he's going to have to cross that wide open area to rejoin the rest of Crook's command. Up to this point, Army casualties have been light, but one bullet changes everything. While withdrawing his men, a bullet plows into Captain Henry's face under his left eye, cuts across the top of his mouth, and blows out under his right eye. Henry falls off his horse and is left behind in the confusion. Frank Garrard credits a native warrior named Ute John with protecting Henry and carrying him back to friendly lines. Ute John made a dash to the place where the colonel fell, got off his horse, and turned it loose just as the Indians got to Colonel Henry. Single-handed, he stood them off until the soldiers commenced shooting and drove the Indians away. If it had not been for the Indian, Colonel Henry would have been killed and scalped where he fell. Interestingly, Oglala oral tradition ties a Smith & Wesson Model 1874 Schofield revolver to Captain Henry. According to the descendants of Respects Nothing, an Oglala warrior, the warrior retrieved the pistol from the horse of a fallen officer at the Rosebud. At the Rosebud fight, we shot an officer. We hit him in the face and he fell off his horse dead. His horse took off running straight to me. I found a revolver in the saddlebag and a few shells. I used the revolver at the Little Bighorn, but when I used up all the shells, I could not find more. I'll put a QR code with some more info and some photos of the pistol for you to check out here. Royal's movement quadruples the Army casualties, and all of the Army killed in action occur in this area. Colonel Royal isn't an idiot. He knows he's going to need some help in extracting his men and reuniting them with the main body. Fortunately, on the west side of Crook's Hill are 2 infantry companies armed with longer Springfield rifles instead of the shorter-range cavalry carbines. These soldiers provide covering fire for Royal as his companies rush eastward towards safety. For the troopers having to make the mad dash under fire from 3 directions, speed is their security. At this point, Mills and Noyes' battalions have made it miles down the Rosebud and are beginning to enter a narrow canyon that screams ambush. Years earlier, the Crow had been jumped by the Lakota and slaughtered in this same area. Even now, the scouts are reluctant to enter it. Mills' assault down the Rosebud is interrupted by Crook's adjutant himself, Captain Azor Nickerson, who recalls his battalion. Mills is like, "For real?" And Nickerson's like, "Yeah, for sure." Mills leads the 8 companies westbound through a draw out of the Rosebud and back toward the battlefield. By the time his troopers arrive, the battle is over. Mills recalled, "I returned about 2:30 and found General Crook in about the same position I had left him and said, 'General, why did you recall me? I had the village and could have held it.' I never saw a man more dejected. He replied, 'Well, Colonel, I found it a more serious engagement than I thought. We have lost about 50 killed and wounded, and the doctors refused to remain with the wounded unless I left the infantry and one of the squadrons with them.' He said, 'I knew I could not keep my promise to support you with the remainder of the force.'" In the field hospital, Captain Mills finds his friend Captain Henry, whose eyes are swollen shut from his wound. When Mills asks how bad it is, Henry responds, "The doctors have told me I must die, but I will not." Like I said, tough. It's brought to Crook's attention that in addition to the wounded, his troopers have burned through most of their ammo. There's a few theories as to that, from poor fire discipline to soldiers piling their rounds on the ground in front of them, then moving to a different position without their bullets. At any rate, Crook's men only have a couple days of food left. Their ammunition is mostly gone, and he has dozens of wounded that need to get out of the field. That night, the dead are buried near Rosebud Creek, and the following morning, the entire column marches over their graves in an attempt to obliterate them and prevent the hostiles from desecrating the bodies. On the march back, Captain Henry is carried in a litter suspended between two mules, but it's a Sophie's choice type situation for him. Do you want to be moved feet first so the mule behind you can bite your face, or head first so you get your skull caved in by a mule kick? Captain Henry took it like a champ. He survived, and after a year spent recuperating from his wound, he returned to active duty. Captain Mills and the rest of Crooks's command spent weeks camping at the base of the Bighorns. The way they saw it, they had fought the big fight against the Lakota and Cheyenne hostiles and needed reinforcements. Days later, while ascending one of the mountains, Mills sees the smoke from a large fire about 40 miles or so to his north. It's possible what Mills was observing was the fire started by the village while they left 2/3 of the 7th Cavalry along the Little Bighorn River. A few days later, Privates James Bell, William Evans, and Benjamin Stewart from Company E, 7th Infantry rode into Crooks's camp. They came from General Alfred Terry's column and brought the first word to Crook of Custer's defeat at the Little Bighorn. Officially, the U.S. Army and its allies suffered 10 killed and 26 wounded at the Rosebud. Hostile casualties are hard to pin down, but the Army recovered 13 bodies. Estimates range from a few dozen to maybe more than 100 Lakota and Cheyenne killed and wounded. The Battle of the Rosebud was something of a mixed bag for the Army. Crooks's men had gotten into a knockdown, drag-out fight with the hostiles, which was an incredibly rare thing to do. And they had held the field at the end of the fight, which was important, I guess. But they hadn't overcome the Lakota and Cheyenne's willingness to fight, nor had they threatened the village. Plus, they were now out of supplies and out of the fight. This haymaker had failed to connect. Crooks's officers wrote that the battle certainly felt like a defeat, and furthermore, Crook himself would take some heat for spending weeks hunting and fishing while Custer was getting wrecked. Crook would have to save his reputation in the fall, but that's a topic for another video. As always, now's your chance to comment on what lessons we can learn from the Rosebud battle. Leave your comments below so people can see them, and as always, please like this video by clicking the thumbs up, subscribing to the Story Out West for more awesome Western-themed content, and enable notifications so you know when the next video drops. Thank you.